Hello, this is Justin Williams with the Wolfpacker Podcast. I'm joined today, as always, by co-host Matt Carter. And today, we're in the week in between the ACC Kickoff and the start of football fall camp for NC State. So we're going to talk a little bit about both of those things and, of course, the big elephant in the room, conference realignment, with the announcement that Texas and Oklahoma are planning to depart the Big 12 in pursuit of the SEC. But before we dive into all those topics, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen to us. We're on the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, Google Play, everywhere you listen to podcasts. Plus, you can always watch us on our YouTube channel, where you should subscribe to our YouTube channel and give this video a thumbs up. Another reminder, please use promo code PACK60 for a free 60-day trial on all of our premium content news and analysis at thewolfpacker.com. A lot of great position comparisons right now, analysis, also some recruiting news as we get closer to the season. Some of the recruiting starts to slow down, but recruiting never really stops. We've always got stories coming up on the site, premium access only for recruiting information. So use that promo code PACK60 to unlock all of that good stuff. Gets you a free 60-day trial to all of that good stuff. But anyways, Matt, let's talk about ACC Kickoff. We were in Charlotte at the Westin in Uptown Charlotte this time last Thursday, and we are recording this Thursday, July 29th, a week after NC State had its availability at the media event. Head coach Dave Dorn was in attendance, and Peyton Wilson, linebacker Peyton Wilson, quarterback Devin Leary, and center Grant Gibson were the player representatives. We got our first in-person access to all of those people for the first time since the pandemic really became a reality in our day-to-day lives back in March of 2020. So, Matt, my question for you is, what was your biggest takeaway from the event? Did anything surprise you from your time in Charlotte last week?
No, I thought it was pretty, standard operating procedure. You got your fairly generic answers about a lot of the preseason questions, and I think the only semi-news that emerged was kind of Dave Dorn talking about the vaccination rates going into the season. Unfortunately for Dave Dorn, I think a couple of reporters took a small snippet of his answer and didn't provide full context and kind of ran with that small snippet, and that didn't fully represent what Dave Dorn said. So that was kind of unfortunate. But the reality is that, I think he told Adam Gold on the radio that they're about 80% vaccinated, 85% is the target number. He feels very comfortable, sounded very confident that they'll get to 85%. The reason why 85%, the target number, is because that allows you to kind of operate under normal circumstances and normal procedures when it comes to team meetings and locker rooms and team gatherings and meals, team meals, and all that stuff, and transportation. Kind of puts you back on a normal plane, both literally and figuratively, I guess you could say. And so that's an important development to watch, and it sounds like NC State kind of optimistic that they'll get there soon. So that was really, I think the big thing was the preseason prediction that kind of came out early this week, where NC State was picked to finish second in the Atlantic. And, I thought it would be them or Boston College. I was a little bit surprised with how easy NC State was, the second choice of a Boston College. And on the flip side of that, I would have put the over and under at 3.5 NC State players making the All-ACC team, and I probably would have gone over with a little hesitancy, and I would have been wrong because three made it. So that was kind of my biggest takeaway.
Well, I'm with you. I also would have been wrong because I also would have taken the over, because I think I had 6 or 7 NC State guys on my All-ACC ballot. Maybe a little
7.
Okay, maybe a little red-tinted glass. Look, if there was a case to make for any NC State player, I'm putting them on there, because you know what? There's 147 votes, and I know every other beat reporter from their respective beats are doing the same for the teams that they cover. So you know what? I don't think there's such a thing as giving NC State too much help when it comes to matters with the ACC, particularly as it relates to dealing with the media. So,
Actually, come to think of it, I think you had 8.
yeah, we don't have to we don't have to dwell on how wrong I was, Matt. But what I was right about was that NC State was picked to finish second in the Atlantic Division in the projected order of finish. Again, 147 votes there from media members across the league that are covering the various teams in the league. Matt, let's also remember that you had NC State at number 3 in the Atlantic Division behind Boston College. There was clearly separation between NC State and Boston College, almost as much separation as there was between NC State and Clemson at the top of the ACC Atlantic Division standings. I would say probably a firm majority of ballots had NC State at number 2, but you did not. I'll let you say something if you want, but we don't have to dwell on it too much.
I truly thought NC State would be second. I was surprised with the gap between NC State and Boston College. But go look at last week's podcast. I explained why I had Boston College. I don't think, in a nutshell, I don't think it's a talent issue. I made a prediction based on looking at schedules, and I think Boston College has a much softer ACC schedule than NC State. So that's why I put them second.
As much as I love giving Matt a hard time, he is right about the difficulty of the schedule. It is real. I mean, NC State draws from the Coastal Division. They're going to play 2 Coastal opponents every year. One of them is going to be Carolina. Carolina was picked to win the Coastal Division in the projected order of finish poll, and Miami is the other Coastal crossover opponent this year, and Miami was picked to finish second in that division. So theoretically, NC State's drawing the 2 best teams from the other division. They have to play every team in their own division, which includes Clemson, which is clearly the best team in the ACC, also the preseason favorites to win the whole thing. And again, just for reference, the 3 players that made the All-ACC team in the preseason poll at ACC Kickoff was Zonovan Knight, running back Zonovan Knight. He was clearly the leader for votes in the running back category. Akim Akwanyu was clearly the leader for offensive tackle votes in that particular category, and then Peyton Wilson also was the votes leader for among ACC linebackers, and he was a first-team All-ACC linebacker in the preseason poll. So 3 candidates from NC State. Of course, they only do 1 team, so it's basically if you make the official preseason All-ACC team, that's basically a first-team type selection. So you're not going to get as many guys as you've seen from maybe like Athlon Sports Magazine or Phil Steele, because they do 3 or 4 different teams on their preseason ballots, which in those NC State's gotten about 9 or 10 a piece in each of those respective football preview magazines. We touched on it briefly. The vaccine rate was kind of the main storyline going into it. I think Dave Dorn and the players addressed it pretty thoroughly. Everyone got questions as it related to the vaccination rate in the locker room. And again, the whole misfortunate young reporter not misquoting Dave Dorn. He didn't misquote Dave Dorn, but he quoted him without providing necessary context. And it if you were only to read the tweet and you weren't watching Dave Dorn's press conference, you'd think, well, that's not really a good look. If you go back and you read the whole quote, which was later shared many times by several reporters on Twitter, it doesn't look as bad. Dave Dorn was really just trying to punt from the question. He didn't want to say a number and then it be wrong in hindsight, but he did tell Adam Gold that day that the vaccination rate of the team was roughly around 80%, which is pretty close to the 85% goal that the ACC has set for teams in the division. I believe 6 teams from the ACC as of last Thursday have reached that goal. So we'll see if the rest of the league can get there.
I was about to say, Jim Phillips said over half the ACC. So the question is he counting Notre Dame? But either way, you're talking 8 teams. Maybe it's 7 of the old ACC plus Notre Dame, or it's But a bunch of those schools have mandatory vaccine requirements. That force, I don't know if force is the right word, but mandate certainly that their football players be vaccinated. So they have built-in advantages when it comes to that. But I suspect you're going to see the vast majority of the teams in the ACC get to that mark, especially as you see the Delta variant kind of rising up and and spiking. You're seeing the numbers of vaccines go way up here in the last week. People starting to realize, okay, from a competitive standpoint, you're going to see football teams realizing that this is a risk. I think one of the big questions, real quick, that have to be answered is, are you going to have to forfeit if you can't play because of a COVID issue? And if that turns out to be the case, and I kind of hope the ACC does, because that will but it would certainly encourage or strongly incentivize teams to really ramp up to maximum levels the vaccination rates on their teams, so that they're not in a position where they might have to forfeit a game.
Well, part of the ACC kickoff is also allowing the representatives from each school to, when they're all in the same city, they're also going to have meetings when they're not meeting with the media. The athletic directors meet with the commissioner of the ACC. The coaches are in communication with the athletic directors. I'm sure the coaches meet together, and then the coaches are getting input from their players as well. So I'm sure all of these issues were addressed in those meetings at ACC kickoff, which is likely why we didn't see any type of protocols announced specifically at the ACC kickoff. But I would imagine that those will be coming in shortly within the next few weeks, because you definitely want to get ahead of those types of things before the season starts and you actually run into a real issue. But if I had to guess, I would think that it's going to involve a forfeiture, because I think you're going to see, organizations like the ACC, the SEC, all these major conferences, which are pretty much making up their own rules, because the NCAA has proven to be impotent as it relates to college football. They basically have no say. The conferences run everything, as we're seeing clearly in the last few weeks. But they're going to be the ones writing these rules, and they're going to have their own incentives to make sure that there's television inventory. So they want to see these games happen, and they're probably not going to be as relaxed as they were last season with, okay, this won't count towards your record. We understand COVID's affecting everyone. Now, a year later, everybody's got the opportunity to get the vaccine, handle stuff in-house, and then, get it together and let's play football this fall. So we will see. We don't have an official announcement yet. We'll report on that as it comes out. One last thing on ACC kickoff, so we can talk about some actual on-the-field stuff that was discussed in Charlotte. There wasn't a ton, because those types of events typically draw questions, based on big picture perspectives. Of course, when we were in Charlotte, the news that Texas and Oklahoma were planning to leave the Big 12 for the SEC came up, so that was a big question in terms of conference realignment, what the coaches thought about that, if it was even on their radar. Another big picture item that was discussed frequently was name, image, and likeness. I was interested to hear from the players just kind of their thoughts on it, if they had started any endorsement deals, or if they had heard from any businesses as it related to name, image, and likeness. As it relates to NC State, it does not appear that any of the players have any type of deals of note. I know Emilio's released a list of 8 different NC State athletes this past week that'll be their partners. I'm sure they'll get to eat at Emilio's for free. That's a good cool little partnership with a local business, and I know Zonovan Knight and Vi Jones were a part of that. But other than that, Devin Leary said he had a Cameo account. So it seems that the approach from the NC State football program, at least, is kind of a let's slowly get ourselves familiar with the name, image, and likeness waters before we dive deep into actually taking any sort of deals. But again, as it relates to on-the-field issues, the thing that stuck out to me, Matt, was just the competition that Dave Dorn was talking about in the locker room in this offseason. And it's not just at the position groups where guys are vying for starting roles. And there are certainly position groups that exist where that is the case. He looked at, multiple aspects of the secondary, at the cornerback positions, at the strong safety position, and he also looked at that right guard spot that's going to be filling in the place for Joe Sculthorpe, who has now graduated and has moved on as an undrafted free agent in the NFL. Those were the 3 kind of position group areas where there seems to be some serious competition in terms of a starting role. But beyond that, there's still a lot of competition for the 2 deep and even 3 deep at some of these various position groups. And it seems like the coaching staff and the program itself is very happy with, the talent on this roster from seniority and experience perspectives of guys who are going to be playing on the field significant minutes this season to some younger guys that could step into some roles as soon as this season, or at least create a competitive culture on the practice field this summer. So Matt, did you also get that sense that the competition level this summer might be greater than years past? I mean, that to me, that was the biggest thing that stuck out about on the field type topics, but was that the case for you?
I don't know if I would say greater than years past, but yeah, they definitely are. That fair competition. That I think it's a deeper competition maybe than years past. But I think, we know who most of the offensive linemen and receivers are going to be, and certainly they're not having a quarterback competition for the first time in a couple of years. Helped, as Dave Dorn talked about. But yeah, certainly the secondary is where the spotlight is, I think, of the entire team, because that's going to be an intense competition, which we'll talk about in a fall camp preview. But I would say what stood out to me was how comfortable they were with the depth of the football team. And that kind of similar to what you were saying about competition, that they were really comfortable with depth. And they feel like they can withstand an injury or two at most positions, which is going to happen. It's inevitable. It happens. And that they're in a better position, whereas last year they were really hamstrung by injuries at safety because they were already thin at depth at that position anyway. This year they are much better equipped to handle if a couple guys get hurt and then Tanner Engel gets ejected for a target, and then all of a sudden you're playing Isaac Duffy Webb out there.
Who was really good, by the way.
Yeah, but all credit to Isaac Duffy Webb. He really stepped up and he earned himself a scholarship elsewhere and out of the transfer portal. But that's not a position you want to be putting yourself in. And this year they feel like they're much more capable of withstanding that. No team can really withstand a catastrophic spate of injuries, because that's by definition catastrophic. Catastrophic is the way the word is defined. No, you can't that total collapse and unwithstandable. So I agree with you. I think that the depth is really what stood out. They really feel good about the depth of this football team. But as we noted before, there are probably about 14 other ACC teams or 13 now that Notre Dame is back to their independent ways. Probably about 13 other ACC teams that probably feel better about their depth than they felt in a long time. And that's because eligibility was frozen and a lot of guys were able to come back this past year.
Well, that was another thing that I left Charlotte thinking, the ACC, as much as people want to criticize it and say, it's just Clemson and a bunch of nobodies, I think this year is going to be different. I think there's some real potential in the ACC. I mean, you've got two contenders coming out of the Coastal, which, if Clemson goes on and wins the Atlantic Division like everybody expects, I do think there are two contenders in the Coastal that could give Clemson a push in a potential ACC championship game in UNC and Miami. But also, you look at this projected order of finish, across the standings in the Atlantic and in the Coastal. I mean, with the exception of Duke and Syracuse, there are really no easy outs in the ACC this year. I mean, even a team like NC State, which goes into 2021, consensus top 35 program from what we've been able to see. They're not going to be in the preseason top 25, but they're going to be one of those teams maybe receiving votes when the preseason polls come out, or, maybe just beyond that, they win a couple games early on. You might see NC State pop into the top 25 as, 23, 24 in the country. If they handle business at Mississippi State, going to that Clemson game in week 4, ranked somewhere between 20 and 25. But NC State, a team like NC State, again, if they're playing a team like Virginia, they don't have Virginia on their schedule this year, but they're playing a team like Boston College or Florida State. I mean, these are going to be toss-up games. Of course, NC State could be favored, or the other team could be favored based on home field advantage or based on injuries leading up to that game. But, assuming all health, you're looking at games that are probably going to be 50-50, 60-40, coin flip type opportunities. So I believe there will be real parity in the league this year. It doesn't seem like Clemson is its usual juggernaut, where teams go into that game thinking we just have no chance to win. I don't think Clemson's going to go through this regular season undefeated. They start with a really tough opponent in Georgia, so they got to get out of week 1 first before they can even start thinking about that. Their ACC schedule isn't too tough. NC State is the toughest game for them as it sits today, coming to Carter Finley Stadium in week 4 on the road against NC State. But again, there's just something about this Clemson team where you look at the All-ACC roster and you don't see as many Clemson names as you typically do. So maybe they're vulnerable. Maybe a team can pick them off this year. But let's transition to conference realignment real quickly so that we can have time for our fall camp preview at the end. And we don't need to dwell on this too much because I think it's been discussed enough. I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, we're not the only podcast you listen to. I'm sure you listen to sports talk radio. I'm sure you read articles elsewhere. And I'm sure you've read plenty of stuff as it relates to conference realignment. If you want to read a NC State ACC specific angle on what's going on with conference realignment, I wrote a story about it earlier this week. You can check that out at thewolfpacker.com in terms of what all this means for the ACC and then trickling down to NC State subsequently. But of course, the news that Oklahoma and Texas are planning to move from the Big 12 to the SEC is huge news for everybody in college football, and we do have to address it really quickly. But I think this is a really simple situation for the ACC, Matt. It's pretty much the same goal as it always has been. I just think there's a little bit more urgency now in the sense that the ACC needs to go find a way to get Notre Dame to become a football member. And when you look back at last season with the situation in 2020 where Notre Dame, all these conferences were announcing conference-only schedules for safety reasons to have a season during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, Notre Dame was at a very risky crossroads where that program really could have found itself without a college football season in 2020 had it not been able to figure out a way to join the ACC. What does the ACC do? They had leverage. They could have said, you want to join us this year? You need to join us for the long road. And they decided, well, we're just going to take you in for a year. We're just going to build up that goodwill, and hopefully Notre Dame, you will take care of us on the back end. And guess what? Notre Dame gladly took that invitation. They were members of the ACC last year. They went to the ACC football championship game, got clobbered by Clemson in that game. And guess what? They still ended up in the college football playoff, still cashed those checks. They get their season, and now, about returning that favor to the ACC. Now, I think Notre Dame still values its independence. So, Matt, just your thoughts on, is Notre Dame really the only option for the ACC? And do you think the ACC missed an opportunity last year in having the leverage to get Notre Dame in the league?
I don't. I think that honestly, I kind of think that oversimplifies it. But I'm theorizing here. I'm guessing Notre Dame had to throw their NBC contract and their college football playoff payout. All of that probably got thrown into the revenue pot for the ACC last year. And so that they were able to meet their distribution numbers or even maybe exceeded them. We'll have to find out. We don't know what the numbers were from last year. But I'm guessing Notre Dame had to agree to revenue sharing for the past year in order to do the football conference, which probably netted the ACC another couple $1 million per school in payout. So I don't think it's as simple as to say that they basically just let them in. I don't think Notre Dame would have ever agreed to a proposition of, you play football this year and we'll give up our independence and play for you forever and ever. We see how much they clearly value their independence. They probably would have just said, screw it, we won't play this year. By the way, it probably may kill your chances of ever getting us to play in the ACC at some point. Look, Justin and I have talked a million times about this. I am not the biggest John Swofford fan among commissioners of the ACC. I just think there is a bit of a long game you have to play with Notre Dame, and a goodwill gesture at a price. I'm assuming there was a price paid. Goes a long way to when that time comes where Notre Dame may have to join a conference, they do so happily with the ACC without questioning anything and just obliging the contract of the ACC that they are contractually obligated to join. So, I think I know that's a popular take on last year. I think that, and it may be true. I may be the one that's wrong. I just kind of wonder if that's oversimplifying it a little bit. But there's no question right now, Notre Dame has all the leverage. And the ACC does need Notre Dame. And what will Notre Dame do? Right now, it seems like they're very content to be independent. And as I talked to a source who basically said, they thought it was 50-50 long run they would join the ACC, but it's 100% certain they'll be the last to make a big move. They're going to hold out as long as they can. I personally think that's a dumb idea for me. And I'm looking at the landscape and I'm seeing the way this is headed, where the NCAA is most likely going to dissolve any responsibility on football and not sanction anything football-wise. And your power conferences are going to sanction it themselves and govern themselves in that regard, which they pretty much do already. And then you'll see at that point, Notre Dame's got to make decisions. Oh, can we really be an independent school and with 64 other teams that are in a Power 5 conference? I mean, how is that really going to work? That's really going to be tricky. And they could probably make it work, especially if there's an expanded playoff. But look, now all of a sudden the conferences are like, wait a second. The SEC was talking to Oklahoma and Texas while they were in the room to negotiate the potential college football playoff expansion, and we weren't. We smell something rotten here. And you're starting to see a slowdown based on reporting from Nicole Auerbach of The Athletics. You're seeing a slowdown of the momentum to college football expansion, where the Pac-12 commissioner came out publicly and said, wait a second, this may not be imminent anymore. And we know the Big 12 probably is on board with saying, wait a second, this isn't imminent anymore. And I'm guessing the ACC might be willing to say, hold on a second here. Notre Dame and the SEC were two teams that were very well represented in this little 4-person committee. I don't know who all was in it, but we might have some more questions now about this. So if I'm Notre Dame, I would say, hey, look, big picture, it's going to be hard to maintain our independence once all of this shakes down. Do we risk it, or do we go ahead and make the jump while we have all the leverage in the world, and maybe we can negotiate a deal where we keep the NBC football contract revenue, or we get to keep all but an X amount of percentage of it, something of that nature that preserves something in it for them. And because right now they can ask for that stuff. But if you wait till the end, you're going to be begging the ACC to let you play football full time. And here you can maybe make scheduling concessions, revenue concessions, the whole 9 yards. So that's my take.
I just really hope we see the day where Notre Dame comes to the ACC and is begging the ACC to be a full-time football member. Now, that would be such a glorious day in college football.
It'd be ironic.
History. It would be great. And I'm with you, Matt. I'm not going to sit here and say the ACC is stupid because it didn't act quicker when it had the leverage last year. When it could have gotten it could have put Notre Dame to the fire a little bit and said, you really want to risk not having a 2020 season? Why don't you go ahead? We know eventually you're going to join the league, so why don't you go ahead and do it, because that's the only way you're going to be playing this season. I know that's kind of what I was hinting at, and maybe the benefit of hindsight, would have changed my strategy. I can remember talking about this last year and saying that's not really the best way to do business. And and I understand that. I know it's a long game with Notre Dame, and you don't want to add a member to the conference with a bad taste in its mouth. It doesn't want to be a a force type situation. You want Notre Dame to embrace being a member of the ACC because that it's just good business strategy. However, I will say that maybe it is time for the ACC to stop being so nice to Notre Dame, because meanwhile, after everybody's emotions have calmed down from whether or not there was going to be a college football season last year, college football happens, everybody gets their money. Everybody didn't make as much money as they normally do because you couldn't put fans in the stands, but nonetheless, the TV inventory was there, and college sports and college football still exists as we know it because football was played last fall. But now, in the meantime, Jack Swarbrick, athletic director at Notre Dame, he goes backdoor and does a deal of secrecy, if you will, with Greg Sankey of the SEC to pass this 12-team college football playoff model, which just so happens to benefit. There's two big winners from this 12-team college football playoff. Notre Dame, first and foremost, because all Notre Dame has to do is play its independent schedule where it plays the military academies, and it plays Stanford, and it plays BYU, and now we'll play 5 ACC games. Real juggernaut of a schedule, if you will. It would be by far the easiest schedule in the SEC, probably the easiest schedule in the Big Ten. But besides the point, if they play that schedule and lose 2 or 3 games, they're still going to have a spot in the college football playoff, and they'd still get a home game in the college football playoff where they can sell more tickets. So it's a big win for Notre Dame in that regard. And then you look at the SEC, the most competitive league in college football. I don't think it's really arguable. It's probably the best league in college football. And it's also the league that would be best positioned to put the most number of teams in the college football playoff, which, of course, creates more revenue for the league and its teams. So 2 big winners from that 12-team college football playoff model. From a parity perspective, I think it'd be fun to watch. I'd love to see expansion from that regard, but that's not what anybody's talking about when these conversations are being had. It's about how much money can be made, and I just think it's you just have to know when you're dealing with Notre Dame is always going to act in its best interest. So any type of goodwill, any type of trust between the ACC and Notre Dame that maybe Notre Dame will actually act in the best interest of everyone in the ACC, that's never going to happen. So you have to act moving forward knowing that we need to put ourselves in a place where Notre Dame needs the ACC if the ACC wants to exist in 2030, 2040, and beyond, before the NCAA just becomes the giant SEC, and UCLA and USC and Ohio State and Michigan and Clemson, they're all in the SEC. It's a 60-team league by 2045, but who knows? Maybe conference realignment won't be as crazy as we necessarily thought a week ago. We will see, and we will keep reporting it here at thewolfpacker.com. But let's transition back to NC State specifically and wrap up this podcast with a little fall camp preview. We were informed earlier this week that NC State's fall camp will begin Wednesday, August 4th, and myself and Matt will be in attendance. The media will be able to watch the first portion of practice that morning, and afterwards we'll be able to talk to head coach Dave Dorn and a few of the players. We'll get to have some more in-person availability, so more questions will be answered. But going into this open practice session, Matt, what's the number one thing you're looking for?
We'll get a good idea what the health of the team is, who's ready for camp and who's not. So that'll be interesting to see, and you also kind of get an idea of where the competition will be and how they're lining up so far, which is always the big part. I think this year is going to be really the numbers are going to be really impressive. I really think we're going to get out there and just be surprised how much is out there and how good they look. And look, we're going to see a glorified walkthrough. I mean, it's what the media sees is very, very little.
What they're not gonna show us all the trick plays, and they're not gonna show their special defensive personnel.
No. So,
I thought they were gonna show us the whole game plan against Carolina.
Don't think that's gonna happen.
Okay.
I really don't think that's gonna happen. So it's so we won't get a whole lot. It's fun to see, but really what we can see is kind of the eyeball test, right? How they look and how they measure up, and kind of compare it to teams in the past and get an idea of that. And so, but knock on wood, it's all going to be weather related. Because if it's raining, they move it indoors, and we will not be able to watch
even a drop, even if it's just sprinkling. I bet that practice gets moved inside. But we will see. Hopefully, it's a beautiful sunny day in Raleigh, like it is this morning. So weather permitting, and we're looking forward to it. Matt, I'm looking forward to seeing, who are the units being rolled out with the first team, who's being rolled out with the second team. You think about those competition battles that Dave Dorn was talking about last week at the ACC Kickoff. At right guard, who are you going to see at right guard with the first team? I know earlier this offseason we were kind of thinking Chandler Zavala would be a guy that would step into that role as a Division II transfer who has had success. Former All-American at his former school, Fairmont State. But again, you just don't know how it's going to translate to the ACC level. He's really big, he's really strong, but how quickly is he able to pick up that offense, and how technically sound is he at that position? Another guy, Derek Eason, he was the starter in the red-white game. A younger guy that's been part of the program, was recruited by the program out of high school. Saw him at that right guard position in the red-white game, and I think he'd probably be my pick that I would expect to see at that right guard position next Wednesday. But who knows? It could go on from there. Maybe they get interesting and Bryson Speece moves over to that guard position. Maybe put a guy like Tim McKay at right tackle. I don't know. But I want to see who's on that first-team offensive line, because really the only two guys that we know for sure are going to be on it is Grant Gibson at center and Ikem Ekwonu at left tackle. And then you're looking at the secondary. I mean, that strong safety position with Jakeen Harris. I know that was cited as a position of some competition there. Jakeen Harris played more snaps than anybody on defense last year, so I'd be surprised to see him lose that starting gig. But if he is, that just shows how fierce the competition battle has been this summer. And then what do you do at cornerback? I mean, I think Shaheem Battle is going to be probably the best bet to be a starter, but then you got a lot of great young talent. You got guys like Cecil Powell and Aiden White, who played really well last year. Aiden White particularly at the end of last season as a true freshman. And then Tariq Pitts, the transfer, I know the coaching staff has ranted and raved about him. He had a great performance in the red-white game. So I'm just interested to see, who's with the first team, who's with the second team, just so we can get an idea of what the depth chart looks like. And I'm sure the readers will be interested to see that too. But Matt, any other thoughts about Falcon? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say one caveat to all that too is when readers read it, subject to change is always the key phrase, because they will roll out a lot of combinations between now and September 2nd when South Florida, which by the way, 5 weeks from today.
Wow.
If I'm right. So
get ready.
5 weeks from today.
35 days, Wolfpack fans. And you get to see those slobbering wolf helmets, which I absolutely love. And I'd like to be on record as saying I think those should be the helmets all season. So if NC State wins that first game against South Florida, which the Wolfpack should be favored by, I'm going to guess 16.5 points, maybe 17 when it's all said and done, leading up to that game week. If they win that game, I don't know, superstition, you want to, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Just keep wearing those helmets because they look so good. Matt, you saw them in person at the Alpha Wolf Showcase. What'd you think?
Looks sharp. The brick background was kind of what I questioned. I love the slobbering wolf. So I kind of agree with you. I wouldn't mind seeing that as kind of the permanent. I'd love to see it. I know people like the red helmet. I would like to see it on the white helmet.
Yeah.
Or a black helmet. That'd be pretty cool too. To see what it would look like. The book looked better in person than I thought it did online. But I'd like to see it just plain.
I was with you about the bricks at first. I was like, I could have gone without the bricks. But the more I thought about it, the more I saw pictures of the helmet, I was like, that's really cool. That's a cool design piece that's specific to NC State. If you're a student, you've ever walked on NC State's campus, it's just filled with red bricks. So I think that was a cool feature, and it's the first time in my lifetime I've ever seen the slobbering wolf logo on any type of NC State equipment, used by the actual athletic department. So if anything, it's a sign that they're, embracing that logo, and maybe we'll see more of it as time moves along, because I think that's the best logo NC State's ever made. I think that should be the primary logo. I like Tuffy too, but Slobbering Wolf is just, it's classic, it's vintage, it's cool, and I think the kids like it too. So anyways, I'll go off my high horse there. Maybe I'll see it up close in person on Wednesday. If I can share my suggestions with anyone, I'll be sure to do that, and I'm sure they'll really consider that. But anyways, let's close out this podcast. We'll have more for you next week. We'll offer our thoughts on what we were able to see at that first day of fall camp. But for now, if you're listening to this, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen to us. Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you listen, we're there. Plus, go to the youtube.com right now. Go to the Wolfpackers YouTube channel. Please hit the subscribe button. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers before the beginning of football season, and I think that is a realistic goal, but we need your help. So, again, if you don't watch us on YouTube, but you do have a YouTube account, do us a huge favor and just go to YouTube and subscribe to the Wolfpacker YouTube channel, and also give this video a thumbs up. And remember, you can use that promo code PACK60 at thewolfpacker.com for a free 60-day trial on all of our premium content, news, and analysis. You can also follow us on social media. Our main account is at the Wolfpacker on Twitter. You can follow me personally at Justin H. Will on Twitter, and you can give us a like on Facebook, NC State Wolfpack on thewolfpacker.com. So for Matt Carter, this is Justin Williams, and this has been the Wolfpacker Podcast.